This conference will now be recorded.
Where's Janet?
She's trying to get on with the answer.
Okay.
Apparently she was having some trouble.
Mm-hmm.
We do we need, this is not a.
I guess it doesn't hurt the
Okay.
board's meeting.
So unofficially, we will open the town hall meeting. It's not an official opening.
Right.
We've done the Pledge of Allegiance for those of you that have not been here. What we are planning to do is let everyone have a chance to talk. We'd ask you to please keep your comments to 3 minutes. I know in other conversations, a lot of people come on and it's very polite and nice of you to tell us we appreciate your hard work, but don't cut yourself time if you need the time.
God bless you.
So I guess at this point then, let's just take the first. Oh, and also one other thing, if you have questions or you want to submit something in writing, feel free to do so to the clerk no matter when it is. We're very happy
It'll be
to have
shared
you.
with the whole board.
That's right.
You send.
Because if you're anything like us, you can't think of everything all at once. Okay, where would we like to start? Who wants to go first?
I can go first.
Okay.
All right, I haven't been to a lot of meetings, so I don't really know when I'm completely, it's confusing. But we were thinking about hosting our house part-time, we're occupants of, Lake Placid, but I don't think there should be a minimum if you have a hosted STR because someone's living in the house all the time. And I don't think you should limit like 48 is the limit of permits, because it's not really fair. Like if somebody's holding a permit, they get to hold that permit forever and then nobody else can be on the permit.
You're talking hosted?
Yeah,
At this
hosted.
point, we're not talking about having a limit on the number of hosted
Okay,
permits.
because I saw 48 or.
The whole intent there is that we want people to be able to afford here, to live
Okay.
here.
Right.
And as far as the number of nights, so far it is 90, but that's what this public hearing is about. And if it doesn't happen this year, we'll definitely revisit it next year.
But hosted is 90 days or hosted is unlimited?
90.
Hosted is 90 days.
The only place you have unlimited number of nights is on Main Street corridor or Village Center,
Okay.
which they consider.
Now, what was the 120? Was it?
That's the town.
Oh, the town, so the village is only 90. Why is it different for town and village?
The history of that, when we started the vacation rental permit, we were trying to come to a number. The town was leaning towards 40. The village was leaning towards 40. The town wanted higher. We agreed on 90. And then the minute we passed the law, they jumped theirs to 120. And
But
here they are.
I don't know, there should be a limit, like if somebody's living there anyway, they're monitoring what's going on anyway, so
Yeah,
like
like I
that's my.
say, tonight, that's
Yeah.
good feedback
So that's
for us. And like I say, if it doesn't happen this year, once we know how enforcement's going, it might happen next year. But one of the two we definitely look at.
And the second thing, the unhosted accounts. So what if you have a second home here and you go away to Florida or something for so many months of the year? You can't really rent your house out if you're not there. But people do they wanna still come and live here part-time in the year. Couldn't they rent it out when they're not here and have someone manage the property, is what I'm saying? Because they're not gonna rent their house out anyways, just sitting there empty. if
That's the
they're not
same
there.
question that a gentleman asked earlier about if someone lives on the property full-time, can that be considered hosted? At this time, no, but we're not saying it won't happen in the future. And once again, the really hard part of this comes down to enforcement, and we're waiting to see what we can and can't do before we get ourselves into a bad situation.
Yeah, I guess even if, yeah, I guess.
Unhosted though.
Pardon me?
A Florida person can be unhosted.
They would have to be unhosted if they didn't live, if this wasn't
But that's
their
what I'm
legal
saying, say
residence.
we live here, say we went to Florida and nobody was living in the house, but we wanted to rent the house out. We
At
could
this
have
point,
someone
you couldn't.
manage it or something,
At this point, no.
because we own, it's not, the house is just gonna sit there empty otherwise.
You could rent it long-term while you're gone.
Yeah, that always works out. But since the pandemic, that hasn't worked out well. A lot of people aren't getting paid their rent, people are destroying, and I'm not saying everybody, but I'm just saying, we have a lot of young people that work in this, and that's kind of the apartments that are getting rented in your home. You don't wanna maybe rent your home to someone who's gonna go in there.
I know a lot of people also that come here to ski for the winter and rent homes, long-term, 4 to 6 months. Use it on and off, but not trying to tell you how to do your business.
Yeah.
But no, everything you're saying, if it doesn't happen this time, we're happy to hear. That's what this whole thing tonight is, to get feedback.
Mhm.
If it doesn't happen this year, once we know what enforcement is, definitely try again next go around. Because I don't see ever have a year we don't go back and revisit this and see how we did.
Mhm.
It's just too important. Anything,
No, but-
anybody else?
I'll follow in on.
Mr. Texan.
Yes. I think the enforcement is the key. Right now, I feel like a lot of this wouldn't be unnecessary if there had been enforcement in the first place in the last 7 years. I still have to register our basic complaint is that you guys have zoned us in, even though you're not allowed to do zoning, and it gets pretty complicated on what's y'all's limitations, but I feel like we've basically been zoned into village residential. We have one property, village residential, that abuts us, and it's been given a commercial permit, so they're not a business. So we're not really in there. I would suggest you just maybe take West Valley and make that for the purposes of this, because it doesn't have to be with the
When you
zoning.
say West Valley, so all the houses that are going in. and
Everybody on the riverside.
Kenzie Overview.
Yeah,
They're all going to be business.
yeah, all the people on, well, not a business, but not in village residential, so they would be, I don't know, whatever.
So that means everyone that moves into Kenzie Overview could.
I'm not sure what Kinsey
Well, it's
Overview
That's
is.
where it gets like,
Excuse me, I don't know what Kinsey Overview is.
that's the big 60 unit.
Okay, well, that's a good example. Most of village residential is single-family housing, and now this is some multifamily housing that you put in on West Valley, because West Valley just, it has a different speed limit, it's totally different. And that's why I'm sure that the bank next door to me became a bank, because it's totally different, and probably didn't have a lot of families. I want to say overall, along with the enforcement, I think that you may with these rules get some relief on the life issues, which has been one of the generators here. I think that the law of unintended consequences is going to not allow any relief on the housing costs in village residential. I think this is actually going to hurt the actual workforce, small people who want to rent at the $1,000 range and below, or whatever, for the apartments like this lady was mentioning, the lady Megan on the phone was mentioning. So I think I would suggest, I know it's not going to happen, I would suggest you just do the enforcement and wait. I know you're not going to do that. That's just my suggestion on the record. And that's it. That's all I have to say.
Enforcement's our number one issue.
Okay.
I mean, what we can and can't do. Thank you. Yes.
Kind of to tag along the enforcement, just from reading what you guys propose with the compliance officer, is the proposal for the compliance officer, is that Mike Orticelli, or is that are you proposing that be a new position?
Jackie can help me out with that, but I believe at this point, if this will be the current code enforcement office, see what they can and can't do. I think the big thing you may have heard earlier is going from criminal offense to civil.
Okay.
The burden of proof for criminal is much higher than civil, so,
Trish wasn't here for that.
okay.
So
I had my back to everybody, unfortunately, I'm sorry.
currently now, the penalties are listed as criminal. And as the mayor was saying, it's harder to enforce because if you're convicted of this, I mean, it doesn't look good on your record. And so we want to change it to civil because it would be easier to enforce. And I think it will bear more weight because more people will go, oh my God, I don't want to get a fine for $1,000. I don't want to get a fine for $2,000. So that's a change. And adding, it's kind of a new, let's just say it's new responsibilities. It's going to still be within the code enforcement office, but someone within that office now will have additional responsibilities that will be listed to do that. So it will shift a little bit more and somebody will have a lot more accountability.
Okay, so just along that line, I feel like that there has to be like you guys had said, compliance officer, which you're talking about Mike Orticelli with more responsibility or whatever.
But it's not gonna be Mike with more responsibility.
No, it's gonna be somebody within that office.
He's got plenty of other
Okay,
things.
whoever it is,
Yeah.
but I think that it's important to really have somebody that is, that's responsible for these short-term rentals, that, basically mans the streets, mans the short-term rentals, not only somebody who answers, but that, in the.
Yep, we're
on the
thinking along the
weekends,
same
on
lines.
Thursday,
Yep.
all those times, I think it's really important that somebody, and it's hard to be a neighbor to complain about someone and then, reap the, whatever's gonna happen as somebody that complains. So it would be more beneficial if an officer said, you're
Yes.
partying at 12 at night, you're pooping on somebody's lawn, whatever you're doing, that you get a ticket for whatever, $1,000 or whatever.
And part of this too is also having better communications between the code enforcement office and our village police. They're going to work hand in hand. The chief has already, we've talked to the chief about communicating when they get calls over the weekend that are 2 o'clock in the morning to let us know, is this an STR, so that we can follow up. Because right now, so many people don't call the hotline, they call the police. So there's a real disconnect there, and we're gonna try to make it more cohesive.
And I think, I think it's important that it's the compliance officer that's making the complaint, not necessarily the neighbor.
Right.
And I think it's important too to have, not just have a hotline, but someone going to these neighborhoods that are the hot button, neighborhoods and seeing what's happening.
And you're bringing up an interesting question because panhandling on Main Street, it used to be, we could go out and say this person's a danger and arrest the person. You can't anymore, there has to be a complaint. New York State has gone totally to the civilians' rights instead of the police department. So I don't even know if we could do what you're saying, but we'll definitely look into it. Once again, it comes back to enforcement is key.
That explains a couple of things.
Oh, it does. I mean, all the ones, come on up and sit in the office, I'll give you a book of interesting situations.
But maybe the neighbors don't have to know that it's a neighbor calling. If you call the police and say this is the address, the police see
But
it's
you
an
gotta file a
STR.
complaint.
Oh,
Maybe that's the problem.
Oh,
I'll have to look into that, but I know with panhandling, you have to have someone, and that's been part of our
They have to
problem.
sign the complaint. And so then the neighbor knows that their neighbor complained about them and then they do mean things to them or
Well,
whatever.
like I
well,
said,
because the neighbors you got.
Like I said,
I mean, they gotta be
You don't know where
respectful.
neighbors are.
we're limited by
Thing.
state laws, but we will also be looking to change this from criminal to civil. I mean, that gives us a lot less burden proof.
That makes
And if
sense.
that doesn't work, I still say we start moving into someone that's their job to drive around.
Absolutely.
But
Thank you.
that's not off the table,
Yeah.
for sure.
Okay.
I mean, we're slowly hoping to find a balance here.
I'm sorry, do you know the people that own the house that may be causing you grief? Do you know who they are?
So
You haven't seen them?
I actually don't even live in the village.
Oh.
I live in the town, but I have friends that live in the village. And the reason why it's important to me to come to village meetings is because it's so close, town
right.
and village are the same.
No, we appreciate your input.
Well, what affects the town, what affects the village affects the town and, so that's, so.
Yeah, 'cause I think, I'm an STR and I have neighbors and if they tell me, in fact, I'll call them and ask, is everything okay? Like, oh, yeah, I'll ask my caretaker. And if they are, then I want to know about it.
And that's you, that's awesome.
But you don't want to get fined, so you
No,
try.
well, no, even without getting, before we had fines and permits, we still were interested in whether or not somebody was gonna be, out and drinking and getting crazy. And a hard time and making the damage. We had someone actually jumped into it from the ledge and then broke it. So, we're interested in that also.
Yeah, that's great.
So if you're not amenable to that,
What if
then
you,
they truly are an absentee owner.
But it also is, it's an every weekend thing, so for a real neighbor, it is distressful to every weekend be in that situation where then, you have to call somebody or we just live with it. We just are like, but anyway, can I just speak to the
I get your point, because
proposal?
what you're saying is a lot of people say, where's the evidence? Where's the police evidence? What people don't get, it's a nuisance.
Oh,
It's like when you're riding behind someone at 15 miles an hour and you want to do 55, you're late to get there, and for an hour, you're sitting behind them. Is it illegal? No, it's a nuisance. And what you're saying, these are nuisance things. Can we
well,
do
I
anything?
mean, some of these are illegal, dumping trash in your yard and
Yep.
that stuff, but it is, we are not anymore, we never actually filed an official complaint because we called, or my husband
Yeah.
called numerous times. And it's just, it's hard. It's hard. I mean, I don't know where you live permanently, but I'm sure you're not living next to that and every weekend having to deal with it. but can I speak to the village's proposal?
You bet.
Which I think that I applaud you for the work that you've done. I think that you're recognizing that unhosted short-term vacation rentals do not belong in village residential. I think that is great that you're saying it belongs in commercial areas. I think that what you're doing with the Main Street corridor makes perfect sense. I think that your move to have this compliance officer to also with the civil penalties instead of it being criminal, because I mean, that just didn't make any sense. As long as this compliance officer really is someone who is working, nights, weekends, and he's going out there and seeing on a Monday morning that all the trash barrels are overflowing. Nobody's sending pictures of that or complaining about that. Well, or that they're parked all over the place. Nobody's doing that. The only thing that I would ask, and I don't know if it's too late for this, but to just rethink that lifetime permit. I think many of us spoke at many of the meetings at the conference center, and the concern was prior to the permits being put in place, that then they would be permanent. And everyone was assured, no, they were only to get a sense of how many we have and for safety issues. And now it feels as if we were misled.
Don't
Because-
forget, when this started out, we had to have a joint meeting between the village and the town.
Exactly.
That's the killer.
Yeah.
Because we had to have the town agree to anything we wanted to change, which made it very difficult for us, because as you can hear, they have a different mindset than we do.
Exactly.
Now we're past that,
Yeah.
but we're still playing catch
Yeah,
up.
and I agree with that. And I think that what the village is doing is so much better than what I see that the town's proposal is. So I applaud you for taking those steps. If there's any way to rethink that permanent,
Well, what we're also hoping
permit,
to
just
get,
because for some people, it would be their lifetime that they're living next to this short-term vacation rental.
but
That's.
we're also hoping, just to answer that part of that question.
Yeah.
We are also hoping that if someone does have a lifetime house, such as Bob here, that it becomes a good neighbor. And if he's a good neighbor and you're not upset with him, then we have no problem. But if he's not a good neighbor, then that's where enforcement comes in, and that's where we have to
And
do
that's where
something.
they'll lose their permit.
Okay.
But that requires us to fulfill it, and we'll do our best.
Yeah, thank you. Can I make a comment for someone
Sure, I mean,
who
we
just is
we
not
only put
here?
out 3 minutes because
Okay,
we
this
didn't know
is-
how many we get.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's a lot
this
back
is
and
not,
forth,
this
so.
is not from me, it's from Shelley Reynolds. She is on her way home right now. Residential neighborhoods that include both town and village property, for example, Beach Hill Circle, should be considered incompatible with STRs with no additional/new STRs allowed. Beach Hill is not a rural area and certainly is not a business area, it is a neighborhood. Having a steady stream of strangers coming and going is not conducive to maintaining a healthy community neighborhood. That's Tim and Shelley Reynolds, and they live on Beach Hill. Thank you.
No, that's good. We appreciate that input. That's part of what we wanted. And if you were here before, like I said, my back's been to everybody, but there is no homeowners association for Beach Hill. And that,
Yeah, I don't live there, so I don't, yeah.
I just have one suggestion. When you are a business and you want to do a new proposal with your business, you have to send out notifications to all your neighbors. What if like STRs send their information, like I have a permit for an STR, and you send it to your neighbors in a certain area of your neighborhood, and then they have that on file, and if they have issues, they can contact you, or, I don't know, that's too
I'm
much.
not sure if I follow your reasoning.
You know, like so like
A notice to neighbors.
a notice to neighbors that you're gonna be running an STR, and here's your information, contact information. So like say she doesn't wanna call the police, but is having a problem, she might just call the owner and say, look, you got a problem over here. I don't know.
The thing is, we just don't have the energy anymore to call, because it's been chronic for years and years and years.
Amazing.
It's hard.
It's amazing.
Well, but if you run, let's just assume that you run a very good place. Not everyone does. And like I say, it's not that they're doing anything illegal. It's just nothing you would do at home, but your renters do because they're not there 365 days a year. That's where the problem comes in, that I see. I don't-
So noise at 7 PM is not a violation, it's a problem.
That's part of it.
Mhm.
But let's face it, when you live in your house, you're there year round, you don't have a party every weekend.
Oh, but
Because we get old, we can't do that.
Plus, property is only, guess what, my neighbor next door has a pool in the backyard, and every weekend, and by the way, she can be in the Metropolitan Opera. And every weekend, they have a crowd over, Saturday and Sunday. Nothing I can do about it.
That's right.
3 of my neighbors' gardener decides to have the only shady street, they park their truck in their, van or whatever else and park in front of our house twice a week. That's living with people, unfortunately. Short-term rentals are different, that's for sure. I'd love to know where you live and who is the rental.
Not a question you can ask, unfortunately. unless they want to
I'm
volunteer.
sure there's a list somewhere.
Because garbage piled up on other people's lawns. Incredible.
We've had it all, trust me. We've had it all.
Well, I don't know why they still have.
But that's enforcement again.
It's back
We
to
have somebody
enforcement,
coming in,
that's
giving
right.
out those fines, they're gonna,
I'll be the
or if
first,
you get 3 write-ups, you're done, they're gonna
I'll
start
be the
paying
first to admit, we
attention.
need to do better. We'll do our best.
I have a question.
Sure.
I guess. I'm Tom, I live up on Grandview, and I have the distinction of having the property line, village town running right through my property. So I've kind of vested interest in both. And yeah, totally echo what everybody's saying, enforcement's the key. Kind of part of my question is, I live just 2 doors away from a house that I'm told has a high number of complaints. The 2 neighbors that are abutting that property have made many complaints. Have there been any sanctions or any accountability on any of these large complaint places in terms of fines, suspension of permit, anything other than a slap on the wrist and a warning?
I think part of the problem there is, and I think Jackie, if you'll jump in and help me, but I think part of the problem is let's use the O.J. Simpson trial, found innocent because they couldn't come to enough evidence to convict. But yet the civil case went in and lambasted him financially.
Mhm.
And I think it's the same problem. Am I right or wrong, Jackie, that there might have been a lot of times Mike wanted to do something, but it didn't rise to criminal intent, but it probably would at a civil level. And that's the reason we're going from criminal to civil, to give them some more teeth so they can do
But
something.
weren't there fines and things built into the original?
There are, and yes,
But the criminal
Has any
civil,
been levied at all?
yes, they
Yeah.
have. Not as many
many
as,
as there should be.
right, exactly, not as many.
That's something of great interest. I'm just saying going forward, and I appreciate that, from everything I've read, there's great intention on fixing this enforcement issue. And I think unless it's genuinely done and there's some accountability and people know about it, this law is just, people are just thumbing their nose at it. And those of us
we
that live nearby
recognize
these
that.
places, we have a high offender right down the street. It's a party every weekend. The neighbors next door have to deal with, you've all heard this from different people. Second thing is, I just want to, so I understand it, because I haven't been to a lot of meetings, but my understanding is in the residential areas, there is something of a sunset that's going to happen because the owner can keep their permit and renew it, but once it changes hands, it cannot be renewed. So in essence, that is going to come out of the STR stock in the residential areas. Is that correct?
That's a proposed plan. I guess you could
Okay.
look at a big picture plan of 10, 20, 30, 50 years.
Yeah.
Eventually, people will be out of the residential neighborhoods and they'll be out on the Main Street corridor.
Okay,
And that's-
that's the way I read it. I just want to make sure that was clear because I'm a huge proponent of returning the housing stock for people that can rent and actually own, that live in the area, that have jobs. I have a lot of young folks that we work with and they can't find rentals. They're coming in from Wilmington, Plattsburgh, Lake Clear, we've all heard it. but
Oh boy, and it's nothing new.
I'm very interested in having some of that housing stock returned back to full-time.
Back in the early 70s, people were coming in from Malone to work with the Hilton at the time. I mean, that's been a history here forever.
Why are they allowing completely unhosted STRs to keep their permits forever?
Not forever until a change of use.
Yeah, but that could be 20, 30, I mean, if it's a business, if it's a corporation
could
that
be.
just bought it to STR it, that could be 20, 30 years, they could just keep it.
It could be. I think part of that
So
is,
that
what if
takes
you did
away-
away with all those, what would it do for you? If you put, say, 80, 160 houses on the market tomorrow, what would it do for you?
Well, you could give them a time period, maybe say 2
That's
to
kind of
3
what we're giving
years.
them. Well, but what
Or
we picked
5
for a time
years.
period was until the end of the, until they change ownership.
Which
And
who
it-
would if they've got a business with all that money coming in, so that house is not.
Yeah.
Well, the 90-day, like really just
encourages that.
Well, that's the other part we did talk
Yeah.
about. Because it's 90 days, it's not really something that you would do for an investment like somebody from Tennessee.
That's true.
But
But what
that's a
about,
good point.
but again, the 90 days shouldn't be, it shouldn't be a cap on the people who live in their Airbnbs, if they're gonna be living there anyway, they're there all the time monitoring it.
Maybe
So
by
why-
next year, when we know what we can do with enforcement, because as we keep hearing, that's
Or it could be
key.
this year.
And we still, that's right, nothing's been set in stone, that's what we're here for, but finding out what we can and can't do.
You know, just kind of make a comment here, you know, as an STR owner, I understand what you're saying. Some people made investments in the last 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
Because real estate's encouraged them to do just that, convert them. So there's a fairness issue. And I'll tell you, this board, I ask plenty of questions and give them plenty of pushback, but I have to say this, they're being fair on both ends, okay? I'm 73, my wife's about there too. So my kids aren't gonna be able to rent the house eventually when they inherit it. The 5 of them get to decide what they wanna do with it. So there's plenty of people who are gonna age out of the process or sell the house, decide to sell the house. Because they're getting, my next door neighbor, Kate and Pete, live in Schenectady and have a house in Saranac and here, and they rented it. As soon as the permits came in, they stopped renting the house. It's a cottage, it's small, 4 to 5 people. So they're already discouraging, but they're trying to do a balance. I think in fairness to them, they're doing a pretty good job of balancing. If I'm not altogether happy with the fact that, you know, there's a sunset on the permit, but I understand why, you know, that they have pressure from people. I'm hearing about party houses or whatever. You know, I can't imagine why anybody wants to rent their house constantly, people are partying.
But
You know,
nobody's monitoring the 90 days though, because I know plenty of people who just disregard that
Give us time is
completely.
all I can say.
They're
And
just
you know,
renting
part of this
whatever,
too is I
basically
think,
tell it saying.
technically, no one here has to sit and debate, but I'm really glad to hear the two of you, if you don't mind, because I get one side, and I have to, it's nice if the two can talk, so, because a lot of times, a lot
I
of
get
these
his point,
people,
he's gonna retire.
but I mean, a lot of people have these houses and just don't understand, why are you persecuting us, why are you all against us? But it's good that they get a chance to talk to someone like you, and you, because the more communication there is, the more people understand where each person's coming from.
And I just want to clarify, we're not just complaining about, oh, we logged short-term rentals in our neighborhood, they weren't party houses. It is about, as this man is saying, having some neighborhoods. And, you know, when we came here, whatever, 15 years ago, we had neighborhoods, and we would like neighborhoods back, welcoming new people, welcoming, you know, maybe a daughter or someone who could, you know, new people who want to come and live here. And I think that we all understand short-term rentals are businesses, whether New York State says they are or not, they're businesses, and they really don't belong in village residential. And that's why it's not just about the party and enforcement, although I applaud you for helping with that, but
Well,
I do
maybe you
think
can
it
answer
is.
a question I've often had too. You live on the street, and let's say at one time was nothing but full-time resident, and your son or daughter's out 3 or 4 years old on their bicycle riding around, and it was safe. And now all of a sudden, you've got people renting in your neighborhood, and these people don't know that little Tommy or Jane is out there, you gotta watch for them. It's dangerous. And that's part of, to me, being in a community. And I think that's part of the reason we're trying to go back to these places being communities, so the traffic level decreases. Yeah. Am I right or wrong
Yeah,
on
no,
that?
true. And Trish brought something up to me today about the thing about also, even if they're not partying, they don't know that, you know, like they're in a neighborhood, they don't know, oh my gosh, there's a sort of a 3-way stop at the Hillcrest Park where I've been rear-ended with kids in my car, and, you know, kids are crossing the street there. So that I agree that is also an issue. But I think that you're trying to move in the right direction.
I have a condo in Florida, and in our complex, you can only rent for 1 month. The problem is the people that come in for 2 or 3 days, by the time they learn the rules, the next 2 or people come in, I mean, that's the problem.
And that's what I'm saying
That's
is
right.
that is the stress.
But that's where
people
we
in the
have to
neighborhood,
get
yes.
people like Bob to inform his people that are coming in, so they know from day one. I mean, like I said, this isn't done. If we can't get compliance, then we'll make it stricter.
Yep.
Mayor,
Appreciate that.
here's a comment.
Okay, sorry about that.
Do you want me to read that, or do
Sure.
you want to read it?
We'll let you moderate. You pick it.
Both of these are from Stephen Bickford. Please reconsider your 90-day limit for hosted properties. That is the least problem STR, and many local residents use the hosted STR of a small apartment as a needed source of income. Your 90-day limit results in cuts to possible income by up to 75%. That is just an incredible income reduction. Finally, your enforcement of 90-day limit seems to be left to neighbors making a complaint. You will hit a lot of permanent residents with this limit. Do not penalize good neighbor hosted properties that are not the problem STRs. Those are the properties you want for STR. The next is just a repeat of
But
that.
to answer that question, if I can, I don't believe anyone in the board, I mean, we're very willing to have our next meeting and discuss these questions that have come up. Is the board in agreement with that?
Yeah.
Okay, I've written that down. I'm very happy to take that suggestion.
There's one comment from Jay Farley. Airbnb and VRBO do ban bad guests and do have a guest rating system as a way of vetting potential guests.
Well, once again, I use the motel experience. I've had bad guests, they just use a different name.
I think Steven's asking me if he can talk, which absolutely anyone on the computer can talk. Just raise your hand.
Yeah.
Or unmute yourself.
Yeah. If anyone wants to unmute themselves, type in a comment, please do.
Yeah, that was it Stephen was the one we just answered?
Yes.
Yeah, Stephen, if you would like to unmute yourself and ask a question live, we're very happy to talk to you. Okay, I'm just going to assume that.
I'm not Steven, but I did want to say something similar. Just on the 90-day limit, I think that there was always a difference between the town and the village of 120 versus 90, but they're going to unlimited and then the village is sticking at 90, puts the village residents at, it seems like just such a arbitrary disadvantage, and especially because our taxes are so much higher, we have so much more in terms of cost to offset.
Megan, can I ask you a question? What you said village residents. Are you a resident? Do you live here?
I'm there part of the year, and I grew up in Lake Placid. Yeah.
She lives here part of the year.
Okay, so you're not a village resident. You have a vacation rental house.
I'm a village taxpayer, but I grew up in Lake Placid, and I'm there part of the year. And it's a second home to me. It's not. I don't consider it a business. It's an offset of cost, and so, I think that my position is just that. To me, I live in a large city, so the fact that Lake Placid is split into a town and a village when it's so small to begin with is sort of hard to wrap my head around. And growing up, I didn't get exposed to that because I wasn't involved in all the, town politics when I was in high school and elementary school. But like the town in all these different zones has been hard for me to understand because even in our city, we don't have that many different jurisdictions for like almost 1 million people. But it's all these splits do seem so arbitrary when it's such a small area. And, of course, having to pay the additional higher, significantly higher taxes, but to have such a disadvantage on the ability to offset those, it just seems, arbitrary. I just don't quite understand. And I grew up in Lake Placid. So when I think of these areas of like, Beach Hill and South Lake and this and that, like, they're presented as very different in all of these meetings, and there are differences to those areas, but it's not so different that I would expect that there would be such zoning differences. Personally, I know other people have their opinion.
It comes down to a balance again. I mean, there are a very large majority that don't want anybody renting homes out in their neighborhoods, and there are those that are doing it to offset their costs, and that's where we're trying to have a balance, and for now, that 90 days is where we are. It doesn't mean in the future we won't revisit this, and the other thing, as we said, is we're trying to make sure we can do enforcement and get everyone to be good neighbors, and maybe that'll mitigate a lot of the problems.
Well, and I do think that like there's a lot of this discussion of enforcement and good neighbors, but I feel like that the assessment that was done showed that almost all of the problems were just a couple of nuisance properties. I mean, of course there are going to be problems, but like I'm very particular about I don't even rent to the maximum allowed number of people I could rent to because I don't want to impact my neighbors. I do feel like part of the community. I'm there as much as I can be. My kids are still in high school or else I'd be up there full time. So we're just sort of like getting out those last few years. But, like I do think that there's a disproportionate talk of the how much of a negative impact. I mean, I think most of the people a lot of people are like me, not, that feel like they're a part of the community, they feel like they're part of the neighborhood, they want to be good neighbors even when they're not there, try to really screen who's going to be renting, both to not destroy our house, but to also not impact our neighbors. So, I understand that there's a balance. I just think that it was close before, but now the gap between like how the town and village is doing, and I worry too about like, geez, if we decided to sell our house, like my house is going to be worth a lot less now than it was a year ago, because if somebody else wants to, like us, buy a place until they can retire up there, they're only part-time, like they're going to buy a place that they can, offset the cost. So I feel like it's almost like, just destroying our our home value, because if someone else bought it, they wouldn't be able to get a permit
By the other
or
token,
offset it all.
from just what you're saying is it's destroying the value so that someone that wants to buy a house and live here can't afford it either. That comes back to that balance thing again.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. And in Lake Placid, when I was growing up, I lived in a rental house. We never could afford to buy a house. So I understand that, but it wasn't affordable then either. So I just, I think that it's maybe, just from my perspective, is a little bit out of whack. Like I feel like you could get rid of all the rental properties in the whole town, and you're still not solving the issue of there not being enough housing for all the people who need it. And I brought it up in the last meeting that when I was growing up and I was out of high school, me and all my friends lived on Main Street. That's where you could afford to live. That's where all the apartment buildings are. And now those are going to unlimited ability for short-term rental, which to me boggles my mind, because I'm like, that's the entire workforce housing. Like, what is the point of this exercise if the only places that people who are bartenders and wait staff and, housekeepers can afford is an apartment, and almost all the apartments are on Main Street, and now all of them can be unlimited short-term rentals? Like, what has been solved?
Yeah, it's backwards.
I appreciate your comments. We'll definitely take that into consideration.
All right, thank you. Thank you for listening.
I think she's right. I think it's backwards in a way, like all those apartment buildings can now be SRTs, and that's where all the workers that
We're working on that. We're not done
work
yet.
on Main Street.
And it's been like that since the law.
And
was
rents aren't
originally
gonna go
passed.
down. I think people are just gonna charge more for rents. I don't think you'll see the housing market. It might go down a little bit, but I don't think now at this point in Lake Placid, it's gonna.
I have a suggestion. I brought this up at a town meeting. The first come, first serve for permits is not the best way to do this.
You're talking about if there's a cap.
Yeah.
I don't think we're talking cap here at all anymore, are we? I mean, and I don't think the town is either. I think that's gone away.
Okay, well,
I
that's.
mean, that's the part of the problem with these is that we have the Taylor law, which means we have to have all our meetings out in the open.
Yeah.
And we've been seeing things that say how disorganized we are.
Right.
That's how meetings are before you go out in public, but we have to sit here, hearts on our sleeves,
Right.
ask stupid questions and look like idiots, but we've been doing a pretty good job of looking stupid.
I feel your pain, I understand. I'm just saying that the ability to use the STRs as a carrot. Somebody wants to build 10-unit apartment complex, well, okay, you can have 5 STRs and 5, something like that.
That would be on the Main Street corridor, that, they wouldn't be able to build anything, because there's really not.
Or anywhere else where it might be appropriate. I'm just saying, as a suggestion, using it as a carrot.
In the
might be a
current
way to
land
be able
use
to do
code, any new developments have to offer a certain percentage of the number of units that they have
Okay.
as affordable housing. There's a percentage, you have to be 150% of the AMI. So that's already in the land use code.
Okay.
And if you're not village center, you're only allowed one? What are, Sentinel Road, how many, if you had a 5 apartment building house, how many can be vacation rentals?
Is that Gateway or is that old? That's Gateway. So
Gateway.
Gateway, it's old military that's only one.
Gateway is unlimited?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's something we'll look into too.
I mean, I don't know about what the rents are in those affordable housings. That might be working against you. I just don't know, but,
It is, we'll see how that ends up.
Okay.
Before I do that, Bob, do we have anybody else at home or online?
Josh?
Hi, I just had another question. I saw that, we're looking to raise fees to get enforcement done correctly. The some of the permit fees are already pretty high. I'm just wondering, if we're gonna raise costs significantly, if you could raise the number of nights to offset that, making that, not such a burden on the rentals, basically.
I would say, I can't speak for the board, but I would say no, the more your answer. If you have to pay more for a permit, you spread it out against the people you're renting to.
Okay. And then another question about the zoning changes. Again, one of the properties I have is on Parkside South. I did bring it up a couple meetings ago. Now again, Parkside South has become a one-way street with a ton of traffic. And Cyril Lane, which is behind it, which I'd love to talk to the board about at length offline. That's traffic both ways nonstop now too. How are, in the long term, areas like Parkside South that have a bunch of other non-conforming uses on them, are we going to be regulating those out as well? Because, we've had two hotels built. I have a number of bed and breakfasts on my street. Obviously, at the end, there's the horse stable, got the golf course, bunch of condos and timeshares all surrounding my property. I don't complain about that, but I'm kind of looking at this at the big picture, like, what's going on here?
The big picture is to try to keep homes that historically been homes so that people can afford to buy them and live in them and not have them turning into unofficial businesses. And when you mentioned properties around you, the stable has been there since 1910, I believe. There's not much we can do to regulate that. I wasn't of the opinion, I know we had some homesteads on Parkside, like Lois Young's old house, but I don't believe there's many bed and breakfasts there. We're just trying to get that to be a residential neighborhood. And it is two-way traffic there unless you're referring to the next 2.5 weeks while we finish construction. I think I answered all three of your questions. But also feel free to give me a call. I'm happy to come into my office and talk to you anytime you'd like.
I don't have that. Thank you so much.
I don't have all the answers, but I know the people that do.
Thank you.
Anybody else that hasn't spoken yet, Anita, that you can see? Or
No hands raised, no comments. Not at the moment.
Just
how many pages of questions do you have?
I'm only gonna ask one page, not all questions.
That's it. Yeah. I couldn't get it on this, no. The link wasn't working.
Oh, what's that?
Bill Miller.
Oh. Well, we'll be back.
Caller number 7, would you like to make a comment?
Is that Bill? Bill, did you want to talk to us? I'm going to take that as a no.
If anyone's having a problem with the link and on the phone, the link was broken on the site, but if you type in the address exactly as it was written, it will work.
In other words, the easy way to click and go to it wasn't, but if you type it in yourself, it'll work. Electronics are great when they work.
Yeah. No, it was just, as an STR, but I'm retired and I spent probably now this.
Can we now know your age?
73, maybe exactly. And, I spent a lot of time up here and I get to see a lot of things I hadn't seen prior to 2020 when I retired. And not everything was the way it was normal during 2020 because of the pandemic, but things are more normal now. I'm seeing what's going on and there's a lot of traffic. I live on Hillcrest, as you know. There's also a lot of short-term rentals. And I've said it before in these meetings, I wouldn't want to raise my kids on Hillcrest because there's too much traffic. So, but it's considered residential. But Hillcrest will not be a neighborhood. The discussion earlier for a long time, about boarding houses, or I guess boarding houses, or
bed and breakfast.
Yeah, bed and breakfast. Yeah, there's an 11-bedroom. It's the former German delegation to the Olympics house that they had 11 bedrooms, 11 baths. It's a boarding house. Now they rent for a month or more, I'm sure. It looks to me like It's actually affordable housing for people who work in the,
I think it's about license, that was really for skaters
Yeah.
originally.
yeah, exactly. So I mean, there's a lot going on that street. There's a church and a school on one end, and there's whatever on the other. I don't want to state my case. I just want to make this, everybody should be recognizing this. We bought a house 22 years ago. It was rented before that. I didn't change the neighborhood. It's the way I look at it. I hate to be confrontational, but it's the truth. There were plenty of rentals around me. The 5 houses on our block between Marcy and Elm were all short-term rentals. One of them bowed out when the permits came in. But this is a tourist resort community. You don't realize that, right? 50% of the housing is STRs. This is from the building assessment report, or the housing assessment report done by this Camion outfit that gave some of the assessment. 34% of the houses, including those short-term rentals, 34%, a third of the housing, you probably know this, are seasonally vacant. People own vacation homes here. There's as many.
You mean second homes or vacation?
Second homes.
Which is the difference there.
I guess.
But I mean, a second homeowner doesn't have somebody in there that's in the hot tub and partying while they're not here.
No.
They're owners that,
Only half of
that
that
their neighbor could come over and talk to them once and they get somewhere.
Right, less than that, but less than half of that 34% are STRs. But I'm just saying, they're embedded in the community. 21% of the houses in this town are owner occupied, 21%. Seasonally vacant houses in the town of North Elba, 33.7% are seasonally vacant. In New York State, it's 4%. This community shouldn't be measured against, when people have asked me a number of times, and someone said, hey, you wouldn't want that in your neighborhood. I live in Carmel, New York. Not a lot of people consider it a tourist destination, and it's not. So that's the character of this community is it's.
Well, can I just say, I feel like everyone tries to tell us how to feel. And like saying, you are like a Disneyland, and that we aren't thinking human beings, but characters. And to, give us these numbers and say constantly, you're a tourist town, you're a tourist town, you're a tourist town, really, I feel is disrespectful and treats us as if we don't have minds of our own. And I understand everybody who needs to make money off their house because they can't afford a second home, but please be respectful of us and stop telling us, I feel, not you particularly, but over and over, that you should be happy and that you'll never be able to afford these houses in these neighborhoods. That's all I have to say.
Well, and if I could interject, I think part of what's being said here too is, yes, we are a tourist town, but we'd like our tourists to be out in the hotels or the commercial district, which is where we're pushing people, so that the people that own homes can be in neighborhoods. That's where we're going.
Okay.
And you're in that twilight zone until you become whatever age or you sell the place.
And we love to welcome tourists,
Yeah.
love them.
My mother lived till 90, so.
We'll hope you break the rule.
I don't think people are trying to be disrespectful.
No, we're not.
Truthfully, I think it's
it's
just changing so quick. I think the locals feel like they weren't ready for it, and then the changing of everything so fast and how much tourists we do get and the growth that we have is so hard to control it.
We've been discovered.
I don't know.
Yeah, and I think we're
pandemic.
just shooting off the map and
Yeah, I don't know the neighborhoods 20 years ago or 25 years ago, but I know
Small little
Hillcrest,
town,
and
and
there were
now
plenty of
it's-
houses that were already rentals on Hillcrest. In fact, when Merrill Thomas showed us houses, there were a raft of houses that we could have chosen from that were short-term rentals already. We weren't looking to convert one, it never occurred to me. I want one on the record, but anyway, I wasn't really trying to disrespect anybody, by the way. But that's one issue. This was supposedly, we're addressing affordable housing. In the town of North Elba, 50% of single-family homes are $300,000 or less. I don't want to say that's not a lot of money, but in the big scheme of things, in neighborhoods that are south of here, that's not a whole lot of.
Part of the problem I think you're not getting there is that living here, you get 40% of what you get if you live down in the city where it's busy. So that makes the salary up here to be able to afford a house much lower, and that's the problem when people come from the city where they get the big and they have a big retirement. They come up here and look at our prices. It's a joke.
Well,
Yeah,
but
people couldn't
the
buy a
problem
house,
is,
yeah.
in terms of affordable housing, the cost of housing is part of the problem. And STRs, it's been said that STRs raise the cost of housing, although the studies that were referred to in this housing thing.
I'll bring you in every time someone says you're taking the value of my house by not letting me rent it as an STR, because that's the other side of that coin.
But it's cost of housing versus income. 34% of workers in the town of North Elmwood make less than $30,000. Less than $30,000.
You're preaching to the choir, we all live
They
here.
can only afford to live here, okay? 40% make less than $35,000. That's 3,874 people out of 9,685 workers. The working is about community.
Yeah. Bob, give me a minute, we got someone.
Yeah.
that
We have
hasn't
two
talked
more
yet.
people with raised hands. Chris, would you like to speak, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, guys. I appreciate everyone taking the time. I had a couple of comments and maybe a question or two. Getting a little feedback. Sorry. I think one comment is I do think as a second homeowner, we do feel like we're part of the community. I think just as much as how I hear residents talking, we do care, but we also expect the same back. We do want our renters when they're there to behave like any resident would. So I think governance, the way you're changing the rules, I applaud that. I think that's great. If there are people that don't follow rules, whether a resident or a renter, they should be fined. And that was my comment too, because I heard about the enforcement officer being the one that has to man the streets. But my question was, wouldn't any complaint be normal if a resident's not following noise ordinance or a renter's not following noise ordinance? I would expect a complaint to be made and they get issued a ticket. Whether that's the police department, then you find out that's a STR and they get fined for that. But I just was curious if it's not just the same for everybody that doesn't follow the rules.
As far as noise ordinance, yes. I don't know about the rest.
And I keep jumping in and answering questions. Anyone wants to jump in, but if not, I think I've got some answers. It comes back to, as you've heard in the audience here, just because it's not an offense that the police can handle, doesn't mean it's not an annoyance. And if you live here and it's your house, you got the right to annoy your neighbors, and it's a hard thing for us to do sometimes to get you to be a good neighbor. But when you rent out your property to different people all the time coming through, that's where we have a little bit of teeth, I guess is the word, and we have a policy that we can enforce it to make your rent.
I applaud that. I mean, I think that as a person that rents, I tell my tenants, you have to follow the rules, whether all the rules, and we hold deposits through the websites, and if they break rules, we will fine them. It's absolutely unacceptable to not be a good neighbor, whether you rent, and I would take that when I rent houses, which I do. I follow the rules of that town. I don't say, hey, it's a free for all. It's still a neighborhood. So they should be respectful. I do think the governance will show that. My last point is make a couple of things on the what's being recommended. I think when the property changes hands, I think when it's sold, I don't think if we're giving our houses to our children someday that they shouldn't be able to do the same thing we did, the family. But if it's sold, I 100% agree, and I think it accomplishes the same goal. Um, and I think that was one thing. And then I think the other comments are that the rules may modify. So I think the 90-day rule, I think it should be 120, but if it's 90, it's not the end of the world. Um, but I think the last one was on the hosted. I know that I have a property that I've thought about having somebody live there full time as a property manager. I would think that hosted would be something you'd want to be able to do and not be living there yourself if it's a property manager. I think that person has to be accountable, but that was my only other comment.
Okay, thank you very much.
Megan, you're up.
Hi, I just wanted to sort of follow on to the woman who was speaking about how, people are being treated. And I do feel like on both sides of the aisle and all the in-betweens, like we have to have a little bit of grace for one another. I feel like as someone, I'm like Chris, that I, feel like I'm very much part of the community. I grew up there and all of that, and try to be there as much as I can. But in most of these meetings, most of the discussions, and holy cow, especially on any online discussion on this, it's definitely like you're vilified as like a monster business owner who cares nothing and is taking advantage of the town. Like, I just, most people are not like that. Most people aren't investors with 10 properties. Most people, feel like they're part of the community. They're offsetting costs. We're fortunate to be able to do it at all. I understand that more than anyone as having, like rented in like 10 places growing up there. My kids can't believe that I lived on like every street in Lake Placid growing up. But, it's, I think that everyone needs to understand that we're not as different as it sometimes looks when we're not face to face and having a normal discussion. And again, I mean, I feel like we have gotten some of that treatment from some of the leadership of the town and village, like a dismissal of any concerns. I mean, we are full taxpayers. We don't live there year round. I agree, but like I contribute to the community. I donate, and I pay as much tax as the person next to me. And so I do feel like, there should be some level of representation and not just resentment. It doesn't create a community feel. And I think that we all benefit if we are a little bit more community minded as a whole. So that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you very much for your comment.
Jordan, your turn.
Hi there. I'm not currently a full-time resident of Lake Placid, but my family does have a second home there. And I'm up there rather frequently, and I've gone up there since the time I was born. Genuinely love Lake Placid. It is hands down my favorite place on earth. But just to echo some of the sentiments that I heard before and that I really didn't hear an answer to, as far as the housing issue in Lake Placid, I want the future of Lake Placid to be as vibrant as its past. Are there any plans to actually address to make housing more affordable for current residents and people that would like to permanently reside in Lake Placid, aside from just moving these short-term rentals and slowly moving them out of residential neighborhoods?
I think I'll jump into that one really quick. We've thought of a lot of ideas, and every time you think of something like saying someone that doesn't rent doesn't have to pay as much, well, then you're being selective and you're not allowed to. It's amazing the laws in New York State.
Can't discriminate.
You can't discriminate. We've come up with a lot of ideas.
There's also 2 big building projects in the works that should help some of the situation too.
Wasn't there just a town that is paying like $10,000 to, I just read it somewhere, to people who are renting
Not rent.
for long
Oh,
term
long term.
versus they're taking their SRTs, they're paying them $10,000 or something too.
You mean raise the STR fees, triple and pay back everyone?
I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know, but I
Deal with
just
that
saw
one.
that. I was like, they must have a serious problem that they are doing that.
Just
I guess just my concern is there's obviously, as you're transitioning from having all of these short-term rentals to moving back to a more residential feel in these neighborhoods, there's obviously going to be a rough patch there. And I was just wondering if you could right now provide a little bit more concrete plan as to how to address that transition time.
Was part of that transition that the person that owns it now maybe is your parents, and what are you going to do when they pass away or they decide not to own the house? Was that part of the transition? Or was that the
Well,
quality?
Yes, that would be part of the transition, but I just mean, in my view, as a younger person who does travel to other locations using short-term rentals, I know that the younger generation tends to use short-term rentals more than staying at hotels. So my perspective is I'm concerned by limiting short-term rentals in such a way that many short-term rentals can only rent for 90 days, so they can't rent for most of the year, that in those periods of lulls in the season where Lake Placid has less tourism than it does, say, in the summer, if you're also limiting that entire sector of short-term rentals, and so then there are only a very limited amount of lodging accommodations for anyone that wants to visit there, how are you going to generate more more business for those local businesses to keep them vivacious and up and running.
Living in Lake Placid and having a store is very difficult, or a motel. We're very seasonal. Sometimes when I bought the motel 30 years ago, I had to have every mortgage payment in the bank after 4 months of the summer. I mean, that's how people live here. And to answer your other question about why aren't we allowing these in residential neighborhoods, we would like them not to be there at all, but we don't want to take their property from them. So we're trying to do a balance and giving them time to go away through attrition. And we're encouraging, like you say, people want to have STRs. We do too, but we want them out on the Main Street corridor where they're not in our neighborhoods. We're back to the word balance again.
I think she's trying to say too, that like the house, so if you stop the Airbnbs in the residential neighborhoods, how can someone who lives here afford a home now?
We're not talking about someone that lives there and is trying to rent part of the house while they're living
No,
there.
but like, or she lives somewhere else that wants to have a seasonal home up here or work part-time up here. How can they afford, like, people at this point coming in people who live here aren't affording the housing that's gonna be available.
If you're talking about a second homeowner, that would be seasonal. We're back to when they're not here, they're not renting, so they're not a problem to the neighborhood. When they are here, they're here long enough that they've talked to their neighbors, they're good neighbors. And the problem is when you've got someone coming in 2 or 3 days, by the time they find out the rules, they've already upset everybody in the neighborhood, then they go away after they've learned the rules, and the next group comes in, and it just is a perpetual cycle. Am I wrong or right? I mean,
But I think we're conflating two issues.
If you up the days, 90 days, more people could afford to buy a house here, because they could work and also rent for more.
You're talking about hosted now, right?
Yeah, hosted. So
Once
I mean, there's a
again,
variety of
we're
different.
seeing what we can do with enforcement before we go down that rabbit hole, but that is something we will look at in the future.
Because the housing market isn't affordable for people who work here.
We agree.
Well,
We're also,
I mean, that's not gonna go down.
don't
It's
forget,
not
there's a
gonna
second
change.
component to this. We don't want the people that do live here to leave our neighborhoods. And that's what we're seeing. A lot of people just are so disgusted, they move.
I have to say though, as someone with more than 60 years history with this town in the short-term rental owner, the neighborhood my house is in cleared out 50 years ago. People left, they went out on Averyville Road, they got out of town.
I call that the suburbs.
Yeah.
It's like city and suburbs, yes.
That neighborhood hollowed out.
Where are you, just out of curiosity?
I'm on corner of Hayes and Elm Street, right behind St. Eustace Church.
Okay.
That neighborhood hollowed out
Yeah.
back in the 70s. So
Along with
before the
Hillcrest,
Olympics,
yes.
local people were gone. And a lot of the houses fell into serious disrepair. Now the short-term rentals are in, a lot of them have had investments put in them. They look a lot better. But the consequence is prices have gone up.
Gentrification.
And I know the assessment on my house has gone way up, way beyond what I've put in it. So, it is not affordable for
Yeah,
someone.
but
who
it's
wants
not
to
gonna
live
come
here.
down.
It's not gonna come down.
It's not gonna be affordable.
That'll be interesting. Well, not to the point of 200,000, obviously, those days are gone, but like I say, part of this is we don't want people that do live here leaving.
And that's part of the distinction between hosted and unhosted. I totally agree. The cost of living to live here, you're living in the house, rent part of it, do whatever.
You could afford to.
That's hosted, makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I and a lot of residents have a hard time feeling that it's a hardship for someone to come in and not be able to afford a second vacation home worth $750,000. That is not a damn hardship. That is, talk to the person that can't afford to rent. And you're driving in from all Staple Forks every day,
For Black Road.
That's the difference.
Exactly.
The big difference between hosted and hosted, that's just the perception of those of us that are full-time residents.
And I will say, it's fun to go on vacation. Right?
And it's necessary.
And, okay, we are vacation land. It's fun. People come, they have fun, but we live here. And yeah, a balance is a good thing, but if you want to have a healthy community, you have to have healthy aspects of housing, integration of multi-layers of people. Come, buy a second home. That's a financial decision you're making, right? Why should I have to subsidize it? That's an aspect how we can see it as locals.
I think-
I would love to have a second home somewhere, but you know what? I don't. I was able to find an
It's already got a home
occupation.
here,
I moved from one location here. I got a job up here that does well for me.
But I think when both of you talk, it seems the same thing we keep saying is, there is a place here to have STRs, and there's a place to have just residential. And what you're saying is where you are, you'd like it to be just residential.
I would like that, yeah.
Yeah,
I
know, we're working
I would
towards
love
that.
to be able to, see my neighbors and talk to them and, be out there, but it's like, here's neighbor one, here's neighbor two, here's neighbor three, because it's the cycle.
We are working in that direction.
Do you know the owners of the short-term rentals in your area?
No.
Have they made any effort to get to know you?
Again, I
Have
think
you
the
made
point,
any
I think
effort to know
the
them?
point is, the people are focused on enforcement and all of that and the little problems. It is about residential neighborhoods being residential neighborhoods and not being lodging districts. They weren't supposed to be lodging districts, and that's what they are. And I, appreciate people saying, I love Lake Placid and I live here part-time and this and that, but having short-term rentals in neighborhoods, it becomes a lodging district, and that's what it's become.
So why does it
And
matter if
just-
it's hosted or not hosted though?
No, hosted is something different. It's completely different. If
But they
you're
come and
living-
go, don't they?
If your neighbor is there and they're just welcoming people in their home, they're supervising it, like the Lysak's house, even as the skating house, that's
So
always,
what
that's
you're
never
saying
been an
is,
issue.
so what you're
you
saying
know?
is that the nuisance matters. That's what you just said. The nuisance matters. There's no nuisance because they're being the supervisor.
They are living there permanently as a resident, okay? And again, that's,
Well, there is a big-
I understand you want to make money off that house, fine. That's all I'm gonna say here,
Well,
okay?
I think many of us who are short-term rental owners are not doing it to make money. We're doing it because we love the town, we have a property here, we own, we love the place. We're trying to make enough to cover the taxes and
On your second home.
on a family home.
Second home, call it what it is, yes.
Yeah, call it a second home.
Yeah, a second home. What's wrong with having a second home?
Nothing's wrong with the second home.
Actually, I hate to say.
No,
it,
I think everybody's has a valid point. It's not a fight, it's just trying to find out how to balance it. Because some people they wanna come up here and have a second home, like, we have a family camp out on a lake and, eventually we might have to rent that out to be able to afford it, because the taxes are gonna be so high on water that we'll lose it if we can't rent it out part-time. And I think that's a lot of locals who live here, you have a home already that you can afford, but new young people coming up, they can't buy a house here. And that's not gonna change from the short-term rentals.
No, but once again, we don't wanna lose the ones that are here
Right,
and have them
but I'm
replaced
just
by
saying, it's
STRs.
not like people are going to be able to afford.
Question. Bob, we got some people.
Yeah, and I'm not on board.
A cut, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So as I've sat in on these meetings, I feel like there's two problems that keep getting brought up that I feel like are very separate, but are not necessarily handled as separate. The first one is affordable housing for community members, and the second one is maintaining a safe and orderly community. As I sit in on these meetings, everyone's perspective is certainly important, and I agree that there's some villainizing going on both sides that I think is disappointing. But I think what I'm struggling with is that I keep hearing each individual person's perspective. Like, I can share that I host a rental property. I live in Lake Placid 10 to 15% of the year. I know and socialize with all of my neighbors. I've never had any kind of a rental complaint ever. But that isn't really important because it's just my perspective. What is important is the data. And I don't hear enough, and I definitely don't feel like there's transparency in access to data. As a community member, I don't know how many complaints there were in 2021, in 2020, in 2019. I don't know how the value of real estate has increased in Lake Placid in the last 20 years compared to the rest of the nation, compared to other resort areas. I also don't know how people that are hosting, whether it's hosted or unhosted rental properties, are or are not contributing to the workforce in Lake Placid. I haven't heard very much at all about the changing landscape of tourism in America and how people are renting houses more than they're staying in hotels. I also don't hear a lot about the national trends of real estate that are real and are happening throughout the country. I own a home in another area and my real estate has gone up just as much, and I don't live in a resort town. And so, as much as I care deeply about the community and the individual people in it, and I want the best for local people, I'm someone who has a social justice background. I want people to have affordable housing. I'm worried that we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And I would like to know how I can have access to more data. Also, the survey data. I spent a lot of time on that survey. And when I've sat in on these meetings, I haven't heard it referred to even once.
You've asked about 8 or 10 questions or brought up 8 or 10 points. My mind's not that good, especially this late in the day, but is there somebody in Dean Dietrich's group that could explain some of that data? Is there some answer you can give?
The Camoin study.
Yeah, I guess the Camoin study would be one of them.
Public information.
Do you have the Camoin study?
No, I wouldn't know where to find it.
It was online.
It's on the town of North Elba, the town of North Elba's website. And then I think Dean, put it on, what's Dean's website? FutureLakePlacid.com. Might have been the survey in regards to STRs that was done in May.
Is it linked to these meetings, like so that people can find it easily? Because it doesn't seem to me like when I'm on the website that I'm able to find information very easily.
We're working on the website. We are.
If you go to the town of North Elba's website and you go to planning, the Camoin study is right up front.
Just the building
Yes.
assessment.
Yeah.
It is on there, I have it.
Yep.
The data I was quoting is from it.
But that data is also from 2019.
No doubt.
So would it be helpful to try to separate the problems a little bit so that the objectives of this stay more clear, and so that as a board you aren't inundated with so much at once, and maybe try to solve one problem at a time, because it seems to me like you've really got two very different problems here.
So I can respond to the lack of data regarding the complaints. We haven't listed a platform with a hotline, and I don't think we've done enough to put that information out so that people who want to make a complaint can register a complaint and it gets logged and we understand. Since we've instituted the permitting system, I believe we've had 117 lodged complaints within the platform that we used. And we believe that this data is flawed because we know that there have been more complaints, but people don't want to make the complaint, or they don't know who to make the complaint to. So moving forward, as we look at the next steps, we need to focus on enforcement, which we've talked about here. So I don't want to give you wrong information, but in honesty, we don't really have good data on the number of complaints, but we will. We will moving forward.
I think it's really important because I think that it will cut down on some of the villainizing that's happening, because I think people in some cases may be assuming that this is a bigger problem than it is, or even there are maybe specific areas where there are problems and areas where there are not.
We agree. As we said, this is a work in progress, never meant to be a one and done. Unfortunately, after we put the vacation rental permit in place, there was a lawsuit and that stopped everything. But at this point, lawsuits or no lawsuits, we'll just continue to keep trying doing our best to refine it and answer the questions.
So the only thing I would say in closing is it really strongly encourage you to pause until you have the data available and that you can be more transparent. And that may also allow you as a board to focus in on the specific data of the specific problem you want to solve at the time.
I've been on the board 13 years and I've been working with this problem for 11 years. We've had nothing but public meetings. So as far as transparency, we're doing the best we can. Anytime you'd like to come, make an appointment, I'd be happy to talk to you. But thank you very much for your input.
Thank you.
Chris, it's your turn.
I'll be brief because I had similar comments to the last person. I do think you need to look at the issues differently. I do applaud you guys for getting something done, and I think this is a move in the right direction. I think even capping them, because I am a believer, even though I'm a second homeowner and I rent my property, I'm a believer in capping it. I think it should be down to a certain level and governed and managed, and I agree with all that, and I think you are taking the right direction. But I don't think the issues of doing that is going to solve the long-term housing, and I heard some individuals speak on that. I would like to talk about that as from the community perspective. I don't think this solves that. It might help a little bit, but the area we're talking about is like any other town in the U.S. Like where I live at home, New Jersey, I can't live in certain areas because it's just too expensive. You can't afford it because it's closer to the river, or it's closer to Main Street, whatever it may be. So that's not going to solve that problem. So I'm interested in, is there a long-term solution there? That was one thing, and I do think the other thing is that it is separate issues, and I think they should be discussed separately because they do come together a lot, and I don't think one solves the other.
Everything you're talking about, we have been talking about for the last 5.5 months in public meetings. I mean, we've all come up with the conclusion that yes, this isn't going to solve everything, but we're doing our best to be a balance between the people that live here and what's going to happen in the future, set a course for the village. But once again, my office is anytime you want me. I live 5 minutes from here. Happy to come in.
I'm going to take you up on that offer. I'll call tomorrow and make an appointment.
I'm getting ready to leave for a week, but yeah, as soon as I get back, I'll be happy to. I'm going to get
the offer, so I'm going to take it, and it'll be a couple weeks out, but I'll make time to come up.
Okay, I look forward to talking to you. Anybody else? Going once online, going twice? Bob, I bet you got one last one. You're not from Tennessee, are you?
But I've been there and I love it. No, but at any rate, just to close out on the point I was making, affordable housing, Chris brought it up. People don't make a lot of money out there, it's as simple as that. In fact, for the folks who have some issue with a second home, a lot of people rent and can't afford a first home, by the way. They feel the very same way about the folks who own a single home. They're doing just fine. So I don't think that comes into the equation. Everybody does how they do, for whatever reason, okay? I work for everything I have. I don't apologize to anybody, to anybody. But to finish up on this, 34% of workers making less than 30K, 40% less than 35K, 3,874 of 9,685. Where are you going to afford a place at that kind of look at the.
Well, don't forget too that my brother-in-law's wife works in recruitment at the hospital. They're having a very hard time getting top doctors to come here because they can't find anywhere to live. They can afford to get up into the 400 or 500, and they're not coming here because there's nothing to buy.
I have no sympathy for doctors. I was in a business.
You will get sick here. Yeah, you will get sick here. There's no doctors to treat you.
But for the last, well, that's true. But for the last 15 years, I was in a business where we served doctors and lawyers, financiers in Westchester and Fairfield County. I got 20 years ago when I was in school, a friend of mine said, oh, they're going to destroy us with HIV and all that. They're making more money than they ever did. Doctors have no problem. But there are people who have problems, and there's healthcare workers. The top employments here are mostly related to tourism, right? They don't make a lot of money in restaurants.
I would say you could probably tie almost 70% of all the salaries here to tourism, yes.
Yeah,
so
and they're very well. Now, here's the other issue, affordable housing in the community. Now, I've lived in Westchester and Putnam County my entire life, okay? In the town of North Elba, according to the housing study, 64.5% of people employed in the town have a commute of less than 10 miles, 70% of less than 24 miles. I have never in my life had a commute of less than 24 miles.
That's because you didn't live in Lake Placid.
That's right, that's right.
That's part of the reason you live here and you pay less.
I heard earlier someone saying, people are commuting in from Wilmington.
Like I said, back in the 70s, they were coming from the Long.
What's that?
Well beyond that.
Oh, like,
Well, I understand, but I don't,
I
I don't consider Wilmington or Saranac or some of these other communities in here, Harrison or some of the other towns that I saw on the study to be a hardship to commute in.
Some of them don't even have vehicles. Taking buses and stuff from the
Not a
long.
good area to live in.
Bob will give you a minute and a half to finish.
So that's basically, my point is that the affordable housing issue is, I saw the study, there was a tangential mention of STRs as perhaps contributing to the issue, but not really a conclusion that eliminating them would help. You're going ahead with the rules and whatever, but I think it's a little bit disingenuous to kind of let the townspeople think, okay?
Town and village.
Town and village, okay? I love.
mean, there's a distinction there.
29,000.
There's a set of different rules there, so.
So the point is that to let them think that doing this with STRs is gonna solve their problem. But doing this with STRs is gonna do first and foremost, and I understand why it makes sense, is making some residents who are very unhappy because they have lousy neighbors who own STRs, stop bugging the board. Because that's what you can see that there are some people who are very strongly emotional about it because they're bothered every weekend. It's only a 90-day limit, so every weekend doesn't apply, but I get it, okay? The question I would have asked is, you live here 15 years, the problem house that you have, it's an STR, how long has it been an STR? You move into a neighborhood with STRs and don't know, and this now, you're crazy, you're really not aware.
You gotta cut you off there, like I say, it's good. And thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you all. I want to thank the board for their effort on this, and I know you put a lot of work into it.
Yes, thank you.
We'll thank the board for upping the 90 days so people can afford to stay living here.
Thank you for balancing your balance and revisiting. Yes. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you to Lauren, who I'm sure is going to summarize this into a lovely article.
Good luck on that.